Have you ever noticed that the wisest people rarely argue? At first, it seems strange. Wouldn't someone who knows the truth fight to defend it? Wouldn't intelligence naturally win every debate? Most people believe that wisdom means having better answers. Ancient philosophers believed something entirely different. Wisdom begins when you realize that not every person is searching for the truth. Some are only searching for victory, and there is a profound difference between the two. Imagine standing in the middle of an ancient Greek marketplace. Merchants negotiate loudly. Politicians promise impossible futures. Philosophers debate beneath marble columns while crowds gather around them. Everyone is speaking. Everyone wants to be heard. Everyone believes they are right. From a distance, it appears to be a celebration of ideas, but if you look more carefully, something else becomes visible. Very few people are actually listening. They are simply waiting for their turn to speak. This pattern has survived for thousands of years. Technology changed. Empires rose and collapsed. Civilizations disappeared. Yet human nature remained astonishingly similar. Today, the marketplace has become social media. The marble columns have become screens. The crowd has become millions of strangers. But the behavior is exactly the same. People don't always argue because they care about truth. They argue because defending an opinion feels like defending themselves. The moment an idea becomes part of someone's identity, questioning the idea feels like attacking the person. Carl Jung believed that the human ego constantly protects the image people have of themselves. This is why facts alone rarely change minds. If accepting a new idea threatens someone's identity, their mind often rejects the evidence before it even considers it. Think about how many conversations you've witnessed where neither person changed their opinion. Hours passed. Voices became louder. Emotions became stronger. But understanding never arrived. Why? Because the conversation stopped being about discovering reality. It became about protecting pride. The Stoics understood this long before modern psychology existed. Epictetus taught that people are disturbed not by reality itself, but by the judgments they make about reality. Two people can experience the exact same event, yet create completely different meanings. One sees an opportunity, another sees an insult. One finds a lesson, another finds an enemy. Reality remains the same, only interpretation changes. The wise person understands this. They stop assuming that every disagreement can be solved with more words. Sometimes the problem isn't a lack of information. Sometimes it's a lack of willingness. Socrates built his entire philosophy around asking questions instead of delivering speeches. Why? Because he knew a remarkable truth. People rarely abandon beliefs because someone defeated them in an argument. They change when they discover contradictions within themselves. That process cannot be forced. It must happen willingly. This is why wisdom often looks like silence, not because the wise have nothing to say, but because they recognize the difference between a conversation and a competition. Most people confuse the two. A conversation seeks understanding. A competition seeks dominance. The first creates growth. The second creates winners and losers. And whenever someone becomes obsessed with winning, truth quietly leaves the room. Marcus Aurelius ruled an empire filled with political conflicts, personal betrayals, and endless criticism. If he had answered every insult, every accusation, every foolish opinion, he would have spent his life fighting battles that never deserved his attention. Instead, he reminded himself of something simple. You always control your own response. You never control someone else's understanding. Perhaps that is the first lesson every wise person eventually learns. Not every door opens because you knock harder. Not every mind changes because you explain better. And not every battle deserves another word. Sometimes, the strongest argument you will ever make is the one you choose not to have. There is an uncomfortable truth that almost everyone discovers too late. Winning an argument does not mean changing a mind. In fact, it often accomplishes the exact opposite. When people feel cornered, they rarely become more open. They become more defensive. The ego interprets defeat as danger, and once that happens, logic quietly disappears. Imagine trying to extinguish a fire by pouring more fuel onto it. No matter how good your intentions are, the flames only grow stronger. Arguments work in much the same way. The harder you try to force someone toward your perspective, the harder they often cling to the beliefs they already have. Psychologists call this the backfire effect. Ancient philosophers simply called it human nature. Schopenhauer understood this remarkably well. He observed that people often defend an opinion not because they know it is true, but because admitting they are wrong feels more painful than remaining mistaken. Think about your own life. How many times have you continued defending something only to realize later, in complete silence, that the other person had been right all along? It rarely happens during the conversation. It happens afterward, when pride has finally left the room. That is why wise people plant ideas instead of forcing conclusions. A seed cannot be pulled from the ground before it is ready. It must grow on its own. The same is true for understanding. No amount of pressure can replace genuine reflection. Socrates mastered this better than almost anyone. Rather than overwhelming people with answers, he asked questions, one after another. Simple questions. Questions so ordinary that they seemed harmless. Yet each one quietly removed another layer of certainty, until eventually the other person arrived at the conclusion by themselves. That was his true genius. He understood that people trust discoveries far more than instructions. A conclusion reached freely becomes part of someone's identity. A conclusion imposed by another person usually creates resistance. This lesson extends far beyond philosophy. It appears in friendships, relationships, families, even in leadership. How many parents spend years trying to force wisdom upon their children only to watch them ignore every warning? Then one day, life teaches the exact same lesson. Suddenly the child understands, not because the words changed, because experience did. There are lessons that no explanation can replace. Only time, only failure, only reality itself. Marcus Aurelius knew this while governing Rome. He could not force every citizen to become wise. He could not eliminate selfishness. He could not erase greed. He accepted that some battles belonged to time rather than argument. Acceptance is not surrender. It is understanding where your responsibility ends. The Stoics constantly reminded themselves of one distinction. Control what belongs to you. Release what does not. Your thoughts belong to you. Your actions belong to you. Your character belongs to you. Someone else's opinion does not. Someone else's pride does not. Someone else's willingness to listen does not. The moment you confuse these boundaries, frustration becomes inevitable, because you begin trying to control something that was never yours. This is why emotionally mature people appear remarkably calm. It isn't because they never disagree. It isn't because they lack conviction. It is because they understand that peace is more valuable than proving themselves right. There is an ancient saying that goes, "Never wrestle with a pig. You both get dirty, and the pig enjoys it." The image is almost humorous, yet its wisdom is profound. Some conflicts consume your energy without bringing you any closer to truth. The more you participate, the more you become like the conflict itself. The wise recognize this early. They preserve their attention like a precious resource, because attention is life. Every unnecessary argument steals hours that could have been spent learning, creating, loving, or simply becoming a better human being. Perhaps the greatest strength is not possessing the perfect argument. Perhaps it is recognizing the exact moment when another explanation will accomplish nothing, and having the discipline to quietly walk away. There comes a moment in every person's life when they realize something that cannot be learned from books alone. Not everyone deserves an explanation. Not because people are evil, not because they are incapable of understanding, but because understanding requires willingness. And willingness can never be forced. Many of us spend years believing that if we simply choose better words, speak more calmly, or explain ourselves one more time, everything will finally make sense. But life quietly teaches another lesson. Some people are not listening to understand you. They are listening to protect the story they have already decided to believe. Once you recognize this, everything begins to change. Imagine standing before an ancient marble mirror. At first glance, it reflects your face, but as you continue looking, you realize something unexpected. The mirror does not show who you are. It shows who you believe yourself to be. Every fear, every certainty, every insecurity, every hidden desire. Human conversations often work exactly the same way. We imagine we are speaking to another person. Yet much of the time, we are simply speaking to the image they have created inside their own mind. That image rarely changes overnight. Carl Jung believed that people do not see the world objectively. They interpret reality through unconscious patterns built over an entire lifetime. Every experience, every disappointment, every success, every wound. Together they become a lens through which reality is interpreted. This is why two people can hear the exact same sentence and walk away with completely different meanings. One hears criticism, the other hears advice. One hears rejection, the other hears honesty. The words remain unchanged. Only the mind transforms them. Understanding this is liberating, because it reminds you that not every misunderstanding is your responsibility. Sometimes you explained yourself perfectly. The other person simply wasn't ready to hear it. Marcus Aurelius constantly reminded himself that every person acts according to what they believe is right, even when they are completely mistaken. That realization replaced anger with perspective. Instead of asking, "How could they do this?" he asked, "What must they believe for this behavior to make sense to them?" That single question changes everything. It shifts your attention away from blame and toward understanding. It doesn't mean you tolerate disrespect. It doesn't mean you abandon your values. It simply means you stop expecting perfect reasoning from imperfect human beings. Perhaps this is one of the greatest forms of emotional maturity, realizing that peace is often more valuable than being understood. There are moments when silence protects your dignity better than another explanation ever could. There are relationships that end not because love disappeared, but because listening did. There are arguments that continue for years, not because the truth is complicated, but because pride refuses to let it enter. The wise person recognizes these moments, not with bitterness, but with clarity. They understand that every minute spent trying to convince someone who has already closed their mind is a minute stolen from becoming the person they are meant to be. The Stoics believed that your life is made from whatever receives your attention. Every thought you repeat becomes stronger. Every emotion you constantly revisit becomes familiar. Every unnecessary conflict quietly becomes part of your character. That is why protecting your attention is one of the greatest acts of wisdom. Attention is where your life happens. Spend it wisely. Spend it on learning, on building, on creating, on loving those who truly listen, on becoming calmer than yesterday. Because in the end, people will believe whatever they choose to believe. You cannot control that. What you can control is whether you sacrifice your peace trying to change them. Perhaps the strongest person is not the one who always has the final word. Perhaps it is the one who knows exactly when words have reached their limit, who quietly smiles, turns around, and continues walking toward a life that no longer depends on being understood. Because true wisdom has never been about winning every argument. It has always been about knowing which battles are too small for the life you are trying to build.